The world was still reeling when the news broke. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the beloved actor, poet and cultural icon, had died in a tragic drowning accident off the coast of Costa Rica. It happened on July 20, 2025, but for those who loved him, whether personally or from afar, it feels like the world has been cracked open ever since. Social media flooded with tributes. His co-stars and collaborators grieved openly. Fans shared stories and memories of growing up with Theo Huxtable, of watching him evolve from a teenage sitcom star into a powerful artist with a voice that carried beyond television. Everyone, it seemed, was talking about Malcolm. Everyone, except one person. His wife. To the world, she was a mystery. He never shared her name. Never brought her into the spotlight. Their marriage was kept far from Hollywood's glare, intentionally, protectively. They built a life together in privacy, raising a child, nurturing a quiet kind of love that never needed cameras or validation. And in the wake of his passing, she remained silent. No statements. No interviews. No public appearances. Until today. After Malcolm-Jamal Warner's sudden death, his wife has broken her silence. Not to seek attention, but because, as she says in her own words, the silence was starting to hurt more than the truth. What she revealed was something deeper than headlines had ever captured. It wasn't just about what happened that day on the beach in Costa Rica, it was about what led to that moment. The life they had shared. The things he had carried. The fears she saw in his eyes. And the secrets he never shared with the world. Her voice trembles. Sometimes she pauses for long stretches, as if trying to find her way through a storm of memory. But once she begins, what unfolds is the intimate story of a man the world thought it knew, and the woman who loved him enough to let him stay hidden. This is her truth. This is their story. And this is the side of Malcolm-Jamal Warner we've never seen, until now. The first time they met, there were no flashing cameras. No red carpet. No anticipation of fate. Just a quiet bookstore in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, tucked between a coffee shop and a record store. He was standing in the poetry section, thumbing through a worn copy of Langston Hughes. She was looking for something by Audre Lorde. Their eyes met over a shelf. She knew who he was, of course she did. How could anyone not? He had been America's older brother. The kid with the charming smile, the warm laugh, the spirit that made even awkward teenage years seem magical on screen. But this wasn't the Malcolm-Jamal Warner from television reruns or magazine covers. This was a man in a worn hoodie, glasses slightly tilted, and a paperback clutched like it meant more to him than anything else in the world. He noticed her only when she dropped her book. It thudded against the floor like a starting pistol. "Langston over Lorde?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She laughed, caught off guard. "I didn't say that." That was the first moment. It was quiet, fleeting, like a whisper that dances on the edge of memory. But it planted something. A seed of connection that neither of them saw coming. From there, the meetings became more intentional. First coffee. Then a walk around Echo Park Lake. He spoke slowly, deliberately. There was a peace about him, but also a heaviness, as if he carried something he didn't talk about often. She learned quickly that he wasn't interested in celebrity talk. He didn't want to discuss awards or Hollywood gossip. He wanted to talk about music. About Black literature. About spirituality. About healing. He listened when she spoke, really listened. And that felt rare. Their love unfolded away from the world's gaze. No Instagram posts. No red carpet handholding. He asked for privacy not out of shame, but out of reverence. "This," he told her once, while holding her hand in the dark of his home studio, "is the only part of my life the world doesn't get to touch." She understood. She agreed. For years, they kept their relationship hidden. Friends knew. A few family members. But the public? They saw nothing. He was interviewed countless times, always asked about love, about marriage, about children. And he'd smile politely, offer something vague, and move on. "Some things aren't meant to be put on display," he'd say afterward, as if reassuring her. "Some things lose their magic when you explain them." And so, they never did. They simply loved, in silence, in shadow, in sanctuary. What the world saw was Malcolm-Jamal Warner, confident, articulate, grounded. A man who had weathered the turbulence of child stardom and emerged wiser, more introspective. But what they didn't see, what she saw, was something even more beautiful. And sometimes more broken. Behind closed doors, he was quiet. Thoughtful. A little weary. He had seen too much of the industry, of the weight that came with fame. He rarely spoke of the darker days, but sometimes, late at night, he would let things slip. He talked about betrayal. About being typecast. About walking into rooms where people wanted the character, but not the man. There were times I wanted to disappear, he admitted one night, lying in bed beside her, eyes tracing the ceiling like it held answers. She never pressed. She just listened. His home was his temple. He filled it with incense, jazz, poetry books, and guitars. There were no awards on the walls. No signs of celebrity. Just art. Just music. Just intention. He wrote constantly, on scraps of paper, in journals, even on napkins. Some of his most powerful words were never published. He feared irrelevance. Not in the spotlight, but in legacy. I want my daughter to know who I really was, he said more than once. Not just who people thought I was. He was deeply spiritual, often meditating before bed, or burning sage after hard days. He believed in energy, in ancestral protection, in the idea that we are all part of something much larger than ourselves. That belief became a cornerstone of how he loved. With patience. With presence. With care. She watched him wrestle with old wounds quietly. There were days he would close himself off, retreat to the studio, headphones on, world shut out. Music was how he processed things he couldn't say out loud. But there was joy too. So much of it. He loved to cook. He danced in the kitchen. He cried during movies. He sent her poems in the middle of the day, just because. He sang softly to their daughter at night, even when she was too old to need lullabies. To her, he wasn't a star. He was simply him, fragile and strong, brilliant and scared, a man still figuring out how to live fully despite everything he had endured. And she loved him for all of it. Their daughter was born on a rainy morning in February. He held her like she was glass, delicate and luminous. For a long time he didn't speak, just stared at her, lips trembling, eyes glistening. Later, she would joke that it was the only time she ever saw him speechless. But in truth, he was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by the miracle of life, by the gravity of fatherhood, by the chance to do things differently than they had been done for him. I didn't know love could feel like this, he whispered. They made the decision together, no announcements. No baby photos in magazines. No names on blogs. No cute reveals on late-night talk shows. Just them. Just their family. She knew he wasn't hiding them, he was protecting them. Fame had burned him before. Relationships picked apart by tabloids. False narratives spun by gossip sites. He wanted his daughter to have a childhood free from flashing bulbs and speculation. They raised her quietly. She went to school like any other kid. They went to parks. To bookstores. To farmers' markets. If anyone recognized him, he'd smile, say thank you, and gently guide his daughter away. She never fully understood who he was to the world, not until she was old enough to Google his name. "What's the Cosby Show?" she asked one day, laughing, holding his old DVD set. He chuckled. "Just something I did a long time ago." But she saw more. She saw how people reacted to him. How strangers looked at him with awe and nostalgia. How adults called him by a name that wasn't really his. And still, he remained grounded. He read to her every night. Taught her how to play chords on the guitar. Wrote silly songs just for her. When he traveled, he brought back books instead of toys. When she got sick, he was the one who sat by her bed, all night, every time. They were a family born in silence, but filled with noise, laughter, music, late-night talks, whispered prayers. He was her safe place. And she his. In those years, hidden from the world, they built something sacred. Something strong. Something the world would only begin to understand after it was already gone. It was supposed to be a break. A moment away from the weight of things. The pressures. The headlines. The quiet tension that had begun to creep into Malcolm's shoulders more often in recent months. He had been working too hard, juggling poetry readings, directing projects, and helping his daughter prepare for her first stage performance at school. He smiled through all of it, but she saw how thin that smile had become. So when he suggested a trip to Costa Rica, she said yes without hesitation. They arrived 2 days before the accident. The beach was warm and nearly empty, the ocean a rhythmic breath just outside their rented villa. Malcolm seemed lighter, freer. He played music while they unpacked. He danced barefoot in the sand with his daughter. He made breakfast in silence while the sun poured across the floor like melted gold. "I needed this," he said, sitting beside her on the patio that first evening, his arm wrapped around her waist. "I forgot what peace felt like." But something in his eyes lingered, an unspoken weight, something he hadn't shared yet. She felt it, like the final line of a poem that won't come. Then came the morning of July 20th. They woke early. He made coffee, humming a Coltrane tune. Their daughter was already in her swimsuit, running around the villa with excitement. Malcolm watched her with that same look he always did, half wonder, half disbelief, as if he still couldn't believe he had helped create something so perfect. "Let's go down early," he said, "before the sun gets too high." They walked to Playa Cockles just after 8 a.m. The tide was rising, but the waters looked calm. Tourists were scattered across the beach, some swimming, some setting up towels, others just walking in the wet sand. The air smelled like salt and hibiscus. She remembered how beautiful he looked that morning. Relaxed. Barefoot in the sand. His skin catching the sunlight like bronze. He held their daughter's hand as they waded into the shallow waves. And then time slipped. A shout. A strange shift in the waves. Their daughter's laughter turning into a cry. Malcolm had been just a few feet out. He was always careful. Always aware. But the current came from nowhere. Later, they would say it was a rip tide, powerful, silent, invisible. It dragged him out in seconds. She screamed. Their daughter stood frozen. 2 surfers dove into the water. Tourists rushed to help. And she stood there, helpless, watching the ocean swallow the man she loved. He came back only as a shape, limp, cold, carried by strangers who laid him down on the sand and began CPR. His eyes were closed. His chest unmoving. She knelt beside him, hands trembling, whispering his name like a prayer. Like if she said it enough, he would come back. But he didn't. The doctor on vacation tried for almost an hour. Then the Red Cross responders. His pulse never returned. His breath never came back. She felt her soul fracture. That was the moment the world tilted. That was the moment the day changed, forever. There's something she never told the authorities. Not out of deceit. Not because she was hiding the truth. But because at the time, in the horror of what had happened, it didn't feel real. It felt like a hallucination. A trauma dream. A thing her mind had conjured in the blur of grief and panic. But now, as she sits alone in the quiet of their home, she can say it. She saw him pause. Just before he went into the water, just before everything unraveled, he had looked back at her. Not a glance. A look. Long, quiet, searching. His hand had slipped from hers slowly. She remembered that clearly. He kissed her forehead, softly, as their daughter ran ahead toward the edge of the surf. Then he pulled back and just stared. There was something in his eyes. She can't describe it perfectly. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was more like knowing. She's thought about that moment 1,000 times. Did he feel the pull of something? Did his body already sense the shift in the tide? Or was it something deeper? Was it emotional, spiritual? Was it a goodbye he hadn't meant to say? She told the police everything else. The timeline, the moment the wave pulled him under, the CPR, the cries. But she never told them about that look. Because she didn't understand it then. She only felt the sharp pain of it later. There's another detail, too. The night before he died, he couldn't sleep. She woke around 3 a.m. and found him outside, sitting under the moonlight with a journal in his lap. When she asked what he was doing, he just smiled and said, "Writing down the stuff I haven't said yet." He never told her what was in that journal. After the accident, it was gone. It wasn't in his bag. It wasn't in the villa. It wasn't found with his clothes. Maybe he left it on the beach. Maybe the tide took it. Or maybe he meant for it to disappear. She's haunted by that. Because maybe he knew something. Maybe he had been trying to say goodbye in a way that wouldn't look like goodbye. She doesn't say it out loud, but somewhere deep in her, the thought lingers. Did he know he wasn't coming back? He said something to her that morning. Not as a dramatic farewell. Not with gravitas. But in that quiet way of his, half in poetry, half in truth. As they stood on the beach, watching their daughter run toward the waves, Malcolm reached for her hand. He squeezed it once and said, "If anything ever happens to me, tell her who I really was." She had smiled, brushing it off. "Don't say that," she told him. "Nothing's happening to you." He nodded, but his gaze was on the water. "I know. Just, if it ever does. Don't let them make me into something I wasn't. Not for legacy. Not for image. Just tell the truth." She thought he meant it metaphorically. Maybe about his career. Maybe about his childhood. He had always struggled with how the world saw him, either through the lens of nostalgia or public expectation. Few had ever seen his full story. But now, those words won't stop echoing in her memory. "If anything ever happens to me, tell her who I really was." He hadn't said goodbye. He hadn't said "I love you," though she knew he did. He had given her a request.
A quiet mission.
In that moment, she hadn't known what he meant. But standing over his body on the sand, holding their daughter in her arms as emergency responders packed up their gear, it became crystal clear. He was asking her to speak.
Not just for him,
but for the part of him the world had never met. There were things Malcolm-Jamal Warner never said out loud. Not in interviews.
Not in press tours.
Not even to some of the people he had known for decades. But his wife knew. She had seen it in the quiet moments. The long silences at the dinner table. The way he would sometimes drift into thought while playing music, his fingers still moving, but his mind far away. There were nights when he would lie awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, blinking back a storm behind his eyes. It wasn't depression, at least not in the way most people understand it.
He functioned. He laughed. He loved.
But there was an ache in him. A lingering sense of something unresolved. He often spoke about feeling like two people. The man the world remembered as Theo, cheerful, quick-witted, full of potential, and the man he had become, more complicated, more burdened, more aware of how fragile everything really was. "There's this version of me people want," he told her once, "and then there's who I really am. And I'm not sure they'd like the real version as much." He had been carrying that weight for decades. The weight of being seen but not understood. Of being celebrated but not always respected. He had fought for roles that reflected his depth, roles that pushed beyond the sitcom boy of the 80s.
Some had come. Many hadn't.
And beneath all of that, there was something else.
Something quieter.
Something he never announced. In the year leading up to his death, he had been dealing with recurring chest tightness.
He downplayed it.
Said it was just stress.
Age. Exhaustion. He didn't want tests. Didn't want drama. She begged him to see someone. He promised he would. But he never did. Whether it was pride, fear, or a sense that he couldn't afford to appear vulnerable, not even to those closest to him, he kept it to himself. He told her he felt fine. He smiled through the pain. He carried on. After his death, she asked the Costa Rican authorities about the autopsy. The official cause, asphyxiation by submersion. Drowning. But the doctors also noted something else, an irregular rhythm in the heart. Nothing definitive. Nothing conclusive. But enough to raise a question she would never stop asking herself. Did something happen before the wave took him? Did his body betray him before the water ever could? She would never know. But what she did know, what she had always known, was that he had been carrying more than he let on. He had secrets. Quiet ones. Soft ones. Heavy ones. And now, she was the only one left who could tell the world. After his body was flown home, everything became noise. Phone calls. Reporters. Producers asking for comment. Former colleagues wanting quotes for tribute specials. Friends reaching out with flowers, with stories, with grief. She heard none of it. For 10 days, she didn't leave their bedroom. She curled beneath the covers with his sweatshirt, inhaling the scent that hadn't yet faded. Their daughter stayed with family, away from the chaos. Away from the flashing cameras already gathering outside the gate. She didn't cry at first. She didn't speak. Grief sat on her chest like a stone, not dramatic but crushing. She watched videos of him on her phone, laughing during interviews, performing spoken word, holding their daughter when she was a baby, and none of it felt real. It was like watching a ghost she hadn't realized was gone. People assumed she would speak quickly, that she would issue a statement, or appear on a morning show to share her story. But she didn't owe the world anything. And Malcolm had always hated the circus. She had every right to disappear. And so she did. She turned down interviews. Declined requests for tributes. She turned off her phone, locked the front gate, and sat in the silence Malcolm had always loved so much. She mourned him not for the version the world had lost, but for the version only she had known. The man who wrote love poems on post-its and stuck them to the bathroom mirror. The man who read every bedtime story in character voices, just to make his daughter laugh. The man who made scrambled eggs like it was a spiritual ritual. The world was mourning an icon. She was mourning her entire life. The moment came without warning. It was late, nearly 3 a.m. The house was dark. Their daughter had finally fallen asleep, her tiny frame curled in the center of the bed they used to share. The silence had been long and deep. Her grief had become familiar. Numb. Like a scar she had stopped touching. And then she opened the drawer. She hadn't meant to. She had gone to look for a charging cord, and her fingers brushed the edge of the old wooden box Malcolm kept in the nightstand. She had never opened it before. He always said it was his personal vault, joking that it held all his deepest thoughts. She lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of notes, folded scraps of paper, song lyrics, small torn pieces from journals. Some were illegible. Some were poems. Some were confessions. And there, in the center of it all, was a letter. It was addressed simply, "For you." Her breath caught. She unfolded it slowly, hands trembling. The ink was smudged in places, like he'd written it quickly, maybe even emotionally. And it read, "I don't know when you'll read this. Maybe soon. Maybe never. Maybe something happens, and I'm gone. But I needed to say it somewhere, just in case I never get the chance. You are the only truth I've ever known. You gave me peace when I was tired of pretending. You gave me family when I had forgotten how to belong. You gave me space to be imperfect, and still be enough. If I go before you, don't protect me with silence. Tell the world who I really was. Even the parts that weren't pretty. Even the parts one tried to hide. Because if I'm remembered at all, I want it to be real." She wept. For the first time since his death, she wept uncontrollably. The kind of cry that rips through your chest and steals the air from your lungs. And in that cry, she knew it was time. Time to speak. Not because the media wanted a soundbite. Not because the world needed closure. But because Malcolm had asked her to. Because silence was no longer sacred. It was a prison. When she finally sat down to speak, there were no cameras. No microphones. Just a single voice recorder on the table beside her, the red light blinking patiently as if it knew how long this moment had waited. She didn't write a script. She didn't rehearse. She simply pressed record and began to speak. Her voice cracked from the start. People think they knew him. And maybe, in some ways, they did. He was all those things they say, kind, thoughtful, brilliant. But he was also scared. He was tired. He was carrying the weight of a world that never really gave him a place to set it down. She paused often. Sometimes for seconds. Sometimes for minutes. But when she continued, the truths came raw. She spoke of his fears, of aging, of being forgotten, of being misunderstood. She revealed that he had written goodbye letters before, not because he was suicidal, but because he believed people deserved their flowers while they could still feel them. She shared stories of his self-doubt. How he had turned down roles because they felt fake. How he had cried after watching his daughter perform at school because he feared he wouldn't be around to see her grow up. She talked about the possible heart condition, how he had refused to see a doctor, even when his breathing got labored. How he had looked her in the eyes and said, "I don't want to find out something I can't fix." And she talked about the final day. The look he gave her. The stillness in his body even before the waves came. "I don't know if it was just the ocean. I really don't. Maybe it was a current. Maybe it was his heart. Maybe it was just time. But whatever it was, it took the best part of me with it." And finally, she said the thing she had never said aloud. "I don't want to stay silent anymore. Because silence won't bring him back. But maybe the truth will let him rest." She stopped recording then. Not because she had nothing left to say, but because her voice couldn't carry the weight of any more. The world had heard her at last. And the truth was beginning to surface. 1 week before he died, Malcolm-Jamal Warner wrote a letter he never gave to anyone. It was tucked away in a drawer, hidden in the wooden box she had finally opened in the quiet of the night. In it, he poured out his fears and hopes. He wrote of his love for their daughter, of his desire to be remembered honestly, not as a perfect icon, but as a flawed human man who tried to do his best. He confessed his exhaustion with fame's illusions and his hope that one day, his art and his truth would speak louder than his image. Most poignantly, he asked that if he ever passed, she would be brave enough to share the real story, so that the world could understand the man behind the name. She hadn't shared this letter before because the pain was too raw, and because for a long time, she felt the world wasn't ready to hear it. But now, with the wound still fresh, she understands that silence isn't protection, it's erasure. To her, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was never just an actor or a celebrity. He was a father whose gentle hands built a safe world for their daughter. A husband whose quiet love was the anchor of their lives. An artist whose soul reached far beyond the bright lights of fame. Their daughter remembers him as a storyteller. Someone who made even the simplest moments magical. She carries his curiosity and kindness in her eyes and in her laughter. His legacy is not only in the roles he played or the awards he won. It lives in the hearts he touched, the family he loved fiercely, and the truth he never fully voiced until now. Her final message is simple and raw. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was a man who asked for privacy, yet he gave so much of himself in return. He was a light that burned quietly but fiercely, a love that never asked for attention but deserved all of it. Today, she breaks the silence not just for him, but
but for everyone who has ever felt unseen or misunderstood. For those who carry invisible burdens. For those who live lives between the lines of public expectation and private truth. If you found this story moving and want to learn more untold truths and deep stories, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more exclusive content. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and honoring Malcolm-Jamal Warner's true legacy with us.